this. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Annabelle, who's going to kick off this presentation, and look forward again to discussing this with you all as we move through the process.
Hi, everyone. Once again, good evening. Thank you all for joining us. And as my director, Kevin, mentioned, we're part of HPD's Office of Neighborhood Strategies, specifically the Queens and Staten Island planning team. And we're joining our colleagues from the Queens Borough President's Office to discuss with you all a bit about who HPD is and our role in the provision of affordable housing for New York City residents. So please feel free to raise your hand as we go through the slides. And as he mentioned, we'll have Q&A after the session, after the presentation. So that with that, we'll dive into HPD's mission as a way to frame the discussion. This is our agenda. So HPD was established in 1978 and is the largest municipal developer of affordable housing in the nation. The Department of Housing Preservation and Development's mission is to promote the quality and affordability of the city's housing and the strength and diversity of its many neighborhoods. And HPD achieves this goal in a number of ways. Responding to tenant issues to ensure the quality of existing housing is maintained is one aspect. Last year, HPD's Office of Enforcement and Neighborhood Services responded to 580,000 housing complaints, inspected 738,000 homes, and issued over 730,000 housing violations, 13,000 of which were heat and hot water, 15,000 lead-based. And HPD works to preserve the affordability of existing homes, as well as to finance and subsidize the construction of new affordable housing, which we'll get into. We offer financial support to property owners in exchange for housing affordability within their property. And HPD also partners with communities to plan for thriving neighborhoods anchored by affordable housing, as seen recently in our agency's work around Resilient Edgemere. So we all know intimately that our city continues to be in the midst of an affordable housing crisis. There are a number of factors that contribute to this. The combination of factors that lead us to see some dire consequences, like an increase in homelessness, decreased quality in housing conditions, more families becoming rent burdened, and homes becoming overcrowded as a measure to make ends meet. So to this first point, housing costs are too high for most New Yorkers. Each night, there are nearly 60,000 people sleeping in the city's shelter system, including 18,000 children. And the high cost of housing is one of the primary causes of homelessness in New York City. There aren't enough available homes. In the last 20 years, the New York City region has added 150,000 more jobs than it has added housing units. And the shortage means that we're all competing for the few available apartments, driving up prices. Maintaining quality housing is expensive. Even moderate income households have difficulty finding affordable housing, and families with the lowest incomes cannot afford rents that support the costs of operating a building. And limited housing and neighborhood choice, preventing homelessness and ensuring that New Yorkers live in safe, high quality housing requires subsidizing housing for low income families and individuals. And New York City may be the most diverse city in the US, but discrimination and segregation in our neighborhoods persist. And with that, I'll pass it to Kevin for the next slide. Oh, just a couple of other points. New York City's segregated neighborhoods are rooted in a history of racist laws, policies, and practices. And there are clear connections between a New Yorker's race, where they live and access to opportunity. Again, speaking to limited housing and neighborhood choice. Sorry, passing it off to Kevin now.
Awesome. Thank you, Annabelle, for that. So understanding that the city is in the midst of this housing crisis, HPD will continue to play a vital role in addressing the issue. What I would like to do now is highlight the variety of strategies that we employ and the necessary tools that allow these strategies to take form. For this presentation, I want to briefly discuss some of the tools we use to preserve existing and create new affordable housing across the city. However, while this presentation will be framed and structured in both our preservation and our creation of affordable housing across the city, I would be remiss, and I don't want to ignore the fact that our agency also engages in extensive work towards protecting city residents. And if it's such required, we can provide additional information on that at a subsequent time. But again, this presentation that we have for you tonight you'll understand is geared and centered more along the preservation and the development of affordable housing in the city. So before we dive into the strategies and tools, I just want to be sure that we all have an understanding of the many types of affordable housing that exist within our city. Affordable housing is a very broadly used term that really speaks to the balance between your income and the cost of housing. Housing is considered affordable if it costs about 1/3 or less of the total household income. And affordable housing is supplied in a few different forms, such as through public housing, which is where the building is both owned and operated by the government. It's also provided through forms such as government administered housing, where the building is owned and operated by a private entity, but the units within those buildings are subsidized by the city or by the government. Within pre-1974 rent stabilized buildings, where these buildings with 6 or more units that were built before 1974 have caps placed on their yearly rent increases. Through rental subsidy / housing vouchers. This is where tenants and/or buildings receive vouchers on units to allow low-income households the opportunity to rent within the private market. And then we also have unregulated housing, where private units may sometimes be offered at below market prices, but again, those units are not beholden to any sort of or any form of regulation to do so or to provide it at those levels. Next slide, please. So as discussed earlier, and as will be discussed as a theme throughout this presentation, HPD both preserves and creates affordable housing throughout the city. The strategy used to preserve existing affordable units includes the provision of resources to properties in exchange for maintaining affordability, providing affordable loans for repairs to help keep the costs of owning a home over time low, and by promoting and ensuring the upkeep of the existing housing stock in the city. Next slide, please. And on the other side of that table, we have HPD's ability to finance the creation of affordable housing on both city-owned land and private land. On city-owned land, 100% of the units created will be affordable. And on private land, we require that our financing and/or the subsidy that goes into the project goes towards the affordable housing. As noted on the screen, and one of the facts that I think is really important and something to highlight at this moment is that most of the new housing development in the city that everyone sees occurring throughout the city, the vast majority of that housing occurs without any HPD involvement. So, as we said earlier in this presentation, there's a very low production of affordable housing with respect to the actual need for housing. And when we talk about affordable housing, we really are talking about a small catchment of the entire world or universe of housing that's being produced in the city. Next slide, please. So now let's look at some of the tools that allow us to either make or preserve affordable housing. One tool we have is the ability to place restrictions on the income eligible to rent an apartment. This tool ensures that our resources are going towards housing those families that can benefit most from the unit. So going back to our housing types that was discussed a couple slides ago, This tool we're able to employ on public housing units, on those government administered units, as well as those developments that are accepting housing vouchers. A second tool that we have is the ability to protect the rents of units from sharp increases. This is regulated by New York State, and this allows us to protect families from experiencing major rent increases that can severely impact a home's finances and lead to displacement. An issue that was highlighted earlier where the vast increases in homelessness, mainly due to increases in housing expenditures. This tool we can employ on all of the housing types that were listed earlier, all except for unregulated housing. Again, there's no regulation on that form of housing. And a third tool is providing rent burden protection, which ensures a household doesn't pay more than 30% of their income in rent. If the household income decreases, the rents in these units will also decrease. Public housing, government assisted housing, and specifically for government assisted housing, this is only at the time of leasing the unit. And rental voucher developments are the types of affordable housing where this tool can be used. And so of these three tools, and if folks have been keeping track, the type of housing where all of these tools can be employed are within our government administered developments. Through these types of projects, the city has the ability to create more affordable housing opportunities. Excuse me, next slide. So as mentioned moments ago, government administered buildings are developments where the affordable housing is financed by HPD. All HPD financed units go through the housing lottery open to all applicable applicants. These units have their rents set across a variety of affordability levels, and tenants have to meet certain eligibility benchmarks to qualify for the units. These are determined via the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. I'm sure most of the folks on this call are aware of, through limits that's associated with the AMI, or the Area Median Income. And what exactly is AMI? I hear this question a lot whenever I'm speaking out in the communities. So for this presentation, I have a slide or two which can specifically talk to that. I feel like I'll get a lot of questions about this, and I'm hopeful that I'm able to address those as we move forward. Next slide, please. Before we move into the next part, I just, a lot of information has been thrown. If we're able to take just a quick moment, if there's any immediate questions. If not, I will roll out with the rest of the presentation. Okay, I will move on. So before we dive into AMI, I do want to tie up how it is used to determine rents and eligibility. HPD's ability to finance developments comes from federal housing funds, and these funds are administered with respect to income limits set by HUD. As you can see, these income limits fall into a number of categories, from extremely low income, which are those households that are earning less than 30% of the area median income, to low income households that range from 51% to 80% of the area median income. Next slide. Every year, HUD calculates the AMI for every geographic region across the country using income data from the US Census. As many of you may know, New York City's AMI is determined based on data from the 5 boroughs, as well as Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam counties. The calculation then spits out and sets a 100% AMI level, and from this, we are able to set limits to determine what incomes are extremely low, low, moderate, and middle. It helps us able to best fit particular programs to particular households, understanding what is considered AMI or 100% AMI for the city. I mean, as you can see, based on the 2022 income levels, a family of 3 making $93,800, which is 80% of the AMI in 2022, would be considered a low-income household, and that household would qualify for units set at that level. Next slide, please. So HPD finances most of its units for households earning up to 80% AMI. On this graphic, you see that a three-person household earning approximately $93,000 would have their rent set at approximately $2,400. And for anyone out there doing some of the quick math, I just want you to know these numbers on the screen are slightly rounded. So, the number would be off by a little bit, but, the exact numbers are on the AMI chart that's on HPD's website. And you'd be able to see how those pencil out. But this is a rough idea of how AMI plays into the setting of these 30%, 50%, and 80% levels or tiers, affordability tiers that many of you may have seen discussed in various projects that may have come through some of your boards. Next slide, please. So using these income limits, HPD is able to structure a variety of programs to preserve and create affordable housing. Our preservation tools include the provision of low interest loans and other financing resources for property rehab and repair. These services come in exchange for affordable units within these projects. While this is not a full list up on the screen, I would refer again, folks, to our website where you can see the full depth of the programs available for the preservation of affordable housing on different properties. And you'd be able to get a better, each one of these programs also has what's considered a term sheet that spells out the specific terms that borrowers or project developers have to abide by in order to receive that financing. Next slide, please. And for our affordable housing production, we have financing programs available for a variety of households that include incomes at extremely low and low income. So that would be our ELA program, a moderate to middle income earners. So that would be our mix and match program, as well as our NCP program, which specifically provides financing for projects developing housing units for those income levels. We also have programs for 100% senior development. So our Senior Affordable Rental Apartment Program, or SARA, as well as supportive housing projects and home ownership opportunities. So we have the SHLP, the Supportive Housing Loan Program for those developments seeking to provide supportive housing. All of our supportive housing projects also come with the provision of supportive services on site for the population that it's serving. We also have our Open Door program, which is our home ownership program to provide moderate to middle income households with an opportunity to own units in buildings or freestanding 1 to 2 family homes. And again, while Annabelle and I are not from HPD's financing team, we do work closely with them, but we're not the finance folks here at HPD. We are open to discussing more on these term sheets, as they're called. And should you have any questions that we can answer tonight, great. And if we are not able to answer, we'll be coordinated with Vicky on an appropriate response to this group to make sure folks feel that they've received sufficient answers to whatever questions you may have. And to close out this presentation, I want to turn it back to you, Annabelle, to walk us through housing our neighbors.
Thank you, Kevin. So just quickly on housing our neighbors, which is our administration's current housing policy. The city's official housing plan for this administration was published in 2022. It builds off policies from the prior administrations and addresses some key challenges, basically the same as those we mentioned earlier in the presentation regarding the housing crisis in New York City. The plan will address 5 key pillars, which I'll go through the strategies that our agency is taking to tackle each pillar. The first one, HPD is not the most directly involved with transforming NYCHA, which is its own entity. However, the agencies will be working closely together on outreach and neighborhood planning. So the second pillar, breaking down addressing homelessness and housing instability, is proposed to, the strategy is to break down government silos to better measure and address homelessness, to combat housing instability, to help New Yorkers stay housed, to improve shelter and services for New Yorkers experiencing homelessness, help New Yorkers in shelter move into permanent housing faster, and reduce the risk of returning to shelter. The third pillar, create and preserve affordable housing. Strategies are to accelerate and increase capacity for new housing supply citywide, increase access to transit and amenities for low-income New Yorkers, meet the housing needs of seniors and people with disabilities, expand the tools to preserve existing low-cost and affordable housing, help communities build and maintain wealth through homeownership, promote housing stability for renters, and provide inclusive development opportunities for equitable growth. For the fourth pillar, improving the health and safety of New Yorkers, the strategies are improving housing quality to ensure healthy and safe living conditions, keeping New Yorkers safe in their homes in a changing climate, and creating healthier and more sustainable homes. And for the fifth pillar, reducing administrative burden, is proposed to be achieved through the strategies of removing barriers to accessing housing stability services by improving interagency coordination, investing in technology, prioritizing user-centered program design, and streamlining procedures to remove steps that are duplicative, unnecessary, and or do not serve the program goals. And with that, that is the end of our presentation. This is our contact info if you would like to get in touch, and we can move on now back to, I guess, to Vicky and or begin Q&A.
Thank you, Annabelle. So first of all, thank you for doing that so quickly. I know we started late and you guys said a lot in a very short amount of time. So before we start Q&A, I just want to go over some ground rules. So everyone's an attendee right now. So I'm going to promote everyone to panelist mode, which means that you're going to get a notice that says you are being promoted to panelist. Please accept it. And then you will be able to unmute yourself to participate in the Q&A. But don't unmute yourself just yet, because we're going to go in order of what's been put in the Q&A chat, and then we'll go in order of hands raised to help facilitate the conversation. And as this discussion is going on, please feel free to write your name and your community board in your name or in the chat, just so folks know which community board you're from, to familiarize themselves. You don't have to if you don't want to, but be nice to see. And then lastly, any questions that I or HPD can't answer in the moment, I will be taking stock of, and HPD and I will talk about it later and hopefully be able to give you a more in-depth answer since there's so many people on the Zoom. So with that, I'm going to start promoting people to panelists, but as I do that, I'm going to ask the first question that Ashford asked, which is, can someone explain why people cannot afford housing? And there's a long comment after that, but it talks about supply and demand. Isn't this how the market economy must work? So the first question is, why can't people afford housing?
I'll take a stab at that. I think there are a bunch of different reasons why, and every household would have its own stories as to why. But taking sort of a broad approach. There isn't a wide supply of affordable housing. Again, as we detailed in this presentation, right, affordable housing is housing where you're not paying more than 30% of your yearly income, and the majority of the available units or the available housing stock are set at market rate prices, which unfortunately are set higher than what I would say average households are able to afford. So again, I think that's a very quick-ish sort of answer to the question, because it's a question that's really broad and it doesn't have any one specific answer. I think generally it's due to the fact that housing just, for the most part, is not affordable for folks. which is why, my agency, we focus mainly on affordable housing and trying to get that best fit to provide affordable housing for residents.
Thank you.
Ashford, I know that's probably not the full answer you're looking for, but I think it's a start of an answer to your question.
Yeah, it's complicated, and I appreciate your answer on that. And we can talk more about that if there's time at the end. But I just want to move on to the next question in the chat from Latrice Davis. Whenever I hear the euphemism affordable housing, my first question is always affordable for whom? With that said, what is the criteria used to set the AMI?
Thank you, Latrice. So HUD, which is the federal government agency that really does this, takes a look at the income across both the five boroughs and those 3 counties outside of the 5 boroughs, and it takes a look at all of those incomes, and basically it gets the median number, and that median number is set as the 100% AMI level. And what that number generally means is that 50% of the population is going to make more than that, and 50% of the population is going to make less than that. And that's the general metric that's used by HUD to determine what our area's median income is. Just basically looking at what's the reported incomes of all households in those 5 counties, in the 5 boroughs, plus those 3 additional counties. And I know there's a lot of conversation. I've heard conversation from the many community boards I've gone to over my career, where that, folks understand, folks in the conversation out there is that, that's not a fair metric to use. Why are folks living in Brooklyn or living in Queens beholden to incomes for folks living in Westchester and Rockland County? Again, what I've heard and what folks have always championed is that that's a change that needs to come at the federal level. And it's a fight that I know continues, on a yearly basis, especially when these numbers are determined and generated.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for sending your questions through the chat. I'm just going to try to go through them quickly, and then hopefully we can move on to live Q&A. So appreciate everyone sending them. Doreen Mohammed wrote, what type of oversight is HPD doing to ensure that this program isn't abused like the 24A program, where in many cases, HPD ignored the rules and gave developers exemptions without ensuring developers were doing their part?
Just really quickly, someone was having technical difficulties, so I forwarded my link. So and it went as my name, but I did not ask that. I wanted to ask my questions when I talk. So I think it's on the call, but they can speak.
Okay,
to
sure.
Lyric, you're muted.
Yes, that was my question. Thank you, Doreen, for helping me get in, and I'd appreciate an answer. Thank you.
So, throughout the course of this presentation, I did mention a number of programs. And was there a specific program that you were referring to in your question?
I'm in a 421A building. My building is subject to stabilization pursuant to the 421A section of the Real Property Tax Law. 1355 Decatur. ProPublica did a story about our building. Our building wasn't even finished. We have forged documents all within our 421A application. In fact, in the ProPublica article, they actually have the forged FCE that HPD, along with DOI's Jessica Hegan, allowed the developer to switch out. What they didn't do was make him finish the building. And I'm still dealing with this 8 years later. I'm fighting with HPD over fire-rated doors because they don't train their inspectors in the codes for doors. How are inspectors supposed to enforce a standard they've never been taught? I mean, really. That's why I have 52 violations written and removed, and the doors still aren't code compliant. And at this point, I'm being told it's political by enforcement. I mean, it's not political to me. We've had packages ripped off out of the common areas. My former roommate had a drunk girl follow her in. I was attacked in the vestibule. We had an armed robbery in the hallway in the middle of the afternoon. And we had defective door hardware removed by the fire department 6 days after HPD inspectors said it was fine. It wasn't fine. And, so when I see these programs, we really do need affordable housing, but we need HPD to have some enforcement. I mean, just to prove my point, 94 South 4th Street is, yes, write that down. It's on Housing Connect. You can live in this swanky building for $923, You can live in a 1 bedroom in this building. There are no 1 bedrooms in those buildings. That building has no 1 bedrooms. What they did was they took what used to be 1 bedrooms and then turned them into duplexes, and they're renting them out for about $4,000 a month as 2 bedrooms. You could find the video tour on Street Easy. Additionally, the building was also signed off by 2 corrupt DOB, well, by a corrupt DOB inspector, Gordon Holder. So you might want to have buildings look at that building as well. Now, that's a Packnouche building, and he's received approximately $600,000 in exemptions for this building for providing these 2 1-bedroom units that do not exist, nor have ever existed. So, you know, between that, I'm in a 421A building, again, that was never completed. You know, the developer submit forgeries, y'all let them remove it. You show them that the building's not finished, they just don't do anything. I mean, it's insane to have to deal with this type of crap as a citizen. And the worst part about it is when you bring it to the attention of HPD, such as Louise Carroll or Anne Marie Santiago, they don't care. They don't have to live with this crap. They don't care if you have heating in the common areas, if you have black mold or gas leaks, or they don't care. They just gaslight you and tell you to call 311. As a citizen, I find that offensive, especially when we're cutting schools and the mayor is asking for all these cuts. We're cutting social programs, yet wasting our money on this type of stuff. So my question is, how are you going to avoid these programs being like the crap show that is 421A? I mean, I don't mean to be negative, but 8 years of having to deal with this crap would make anybody salty, I promise.
No, yeah, no, please don't apologize to me or any of us about that. That sounds like a very horrible situation. And I apologize to you because I'm not able to address 80% of what you shared with me. But what I would like to do is give you my email address so that we can continue some dialogue and I could try to find a way to assist you the best I can.
That would be great. I mean, our 421A issues, they persist. But if you could do anything, the one thing I would ask HPD to do is have their inspectors take the hour class. It's only an hour. And they would learn the NFPA standards that govern doors. Those 17 people that died in the Bronx of smoke inhalation while they fled for their lives didn't have to die. Right. They didn't. They died because we're not doing our job. Well, not we, HPD. Right. Not even just you, but Anne Marie Santiago. Those codes have been on the books for decades. She should read them.
So thank you, Lyric. We very much appreciate your comments and your questions. We don't want to take up too much time because there are a lot more questions here.
Sorry, guys.
No worries.
You put your email in the chat. I'll take it and I'll document it.
Okay, great. So let's see. The next question, Dolores Orr asked, what is the vacancy rate in New York City currently?
I want to say 4%, but I can get back to you, Dolores, on that.
I actually know about vacant numbers. So I can speak on the last numbers I saw was 2021 data because it just became 2023. There are 3,053 400 vacant units in New York City right now. About 42,000 of those are rent stabilized ones. It's likely a lot higher because there's been some estimated numbers at like 125K. For apartments that cost 2,300 or less, it's about 12.5% vacancy rate of the overall, like, I forget the root number. It's like something right under 5%, I forget. So like clearly, and that relates actually to the question I was going to ask. So I don't know how much I should get into it, but.
Well, Doreen, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get things answered in the order that they were asked. So if you could just pause a moment, we'll come back to that.
No, I that's why I said that's the data. I had my hand raised for a long time.
Yeah, but, thank you.
I skipped ahead, but okay. But yeah, that's fine.
So we have a comment from Anatole. Thank you for sharing your story. If there's anything else you'd like to add to your Q&A, please feel free. But I don't see a question, so I just wanted to address that I saw your comment. So the next question, Maharani Singh asked, does HPD offer vouchers directly to individuals who are in a rental apartment and don't want their landlord to kick them out if he or she finds that person that cannot pay their rent. So I guess the question is, how does HPD offer vouchers directly to individuals in a department, and how can they apply for help?
So let me get back to that individual and how they can apply, but I do believe that there is a voucher program that's individual based as well as project based. But the specifics of how that application process goes, I don't know right now, but I can definitely get that back to you, Vicky, to get out to this individual.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so at this point, I think we will turn it over to hands that are raised. Thank you everyone for your patience. I realize that Zoom stuff is awkward and stilted, but thank you so much for sticking with us. I'm gonna go ahead and unmute Dolores if there's any other question you had.
Yes, there is. Thank you very much. I just put the short one in the chat, and I'm going to be as short as I can. So first, Kevin is smiling because we have a long relationship out in the Rockaways. Because
I miss you, Dolores.
Hi, how are you?
Dolores.
We'll be seeing you again soon, I'm sure. So I just one comment, and Kevin is very familiar with this comment, and it greatly concerns me when I look at the affordable housing that was built in the 1960s. The city cared about their residents. We have green space, we have playgrounds, there's open space, and you don't feel like you're just in this cement world. Today, if you look at the affordable housing, and I realize with the shortage of housing, but you're not giving quality of life to our residents going in. There's no green spaces, there's no playgrounds, at least not in Community Board 14. We don't have a single blade of grass on any piece of affordable housing that the city has put out here. So, and I've heard concerns, so I'm gonna just go on to something else. I understand the lottery process. What I've heard from a number of people is that when they get to the interview with the landlord, they have a very difficult time in meeting whatever the landlord's requirements are. So is there a standard requirement of what the landlord could demand of the tenant and when they can exclude them for not being eligible? Since most of it is built with city dollars, I would think HPD should be governing what is a tenant, what do they need to have to qualify to get in there? I don't know if anyone can answer that.
It's my understanding that there is a standard process that's handled by a third party operator. But I would be curious to know more about those situations where residents are having these issues with the landlords. Okay. So to better be able to address those questions on a more one-to-one specific level.
Okay. So, and then there's two environmental issues that I have great concern in terms of where affordable housing is being built. I am on the New York CAR, which is the New York Citizen Advisory Roundtable for LaGuardia Airport and JFK Airport. And we just had our quarterly meeting the other night. And the FAA advised, and I'm talking about this because I live out in Rockaway, so we see a lot of planes out of JFK, but their recommendation to the city was not to put any residential housing in any area that has a DNL of more than 65. And what's a DNL? It's a 24-hour measure of sound. They measure it 365 days a year, but they take the average of 24 hours. And if the decibel of that sound is more than 65, it's unhealthy for people to live in that. And Willis Point was never built because it's directly in the approach for LaGuardia. And the FAA recommended that no housing go there for that reason, and yet the city's going forward with that. And then my other point, and so I don't know if you can answer that, but I'll bring in the other environmental, are the folks that are moving into affordable housing being told when they're moving into a flood zone 1 that they can expect flooding on a fairly regular basis as we do out in the Rockaways. So you have someone moving from Manhattan out to Community Board 14, and all of Community Board 14, every inch of it is in a flood zone 1, which has the highest rate of flooding. So are the residents told that, or they're coming into an area where it's unhealthy for the noise, and they're coming into an area that floods on a regular basis?
Thanks, Dolores. I think those are two excellent points. For the noise one, and again, folks will forgive me. There are certain divisions within HPD, and
yes,
I'm not in the environmental team. I'm not in the finance team, so it's really difficult for me to answer those. But I can get answers. When we have projects that are built like right next to elevated trains, we have these window attenuation levels where you have to keep that sound out. I would imagine that there's something similar to that that would be going into a project that's in Willits, and most definitely in the projects out in the Rockaways. I'm giving those noise levels.
I doubt that any of those buildings were built with soundproofing. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay to interrupt. It's fine. We're having a conversation, and I value that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is our projects that's coming online. I really don't want to speak about projects that came online before me until I get like better information about them. So I will look into that for you so I could be able to address that. And then the second one was about the environmental conditions of sites when folks are coming in. I would want to also look at our marketing materials. We have extensive and robust marketing materials that really talks about all of the features with the buildings that we have available through the lottery. I don't know if we go into that level of detail, but I can find that out.
Okay.
Thank you, Dolores. Thank you, Kevin. So we're going to move on to Doreen. Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, no problem. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's one root way of saying the question, but I'll articulate as best as possible since we started talking about the vacant units, et cetera, right? So, there's this YIMBY, et cetera, narrative that it's build, and that's supposed to solve our housing crisis. The data has shown that that's just not true, right? It doesn't meet the needs of people who have the lowest incomes, right? Like, the average income in New York City is $43,000, right? Usually it's one income in a big household of people, or even if someone's single or just 2 or 3 people, that doesn't matter, right? Like, there are 353,400 vacant apartments in New York City right now, and that's just what's on the books, right? Like, plans like Governor Hochul's plan to build 800,000 units, or Mayor Adams' City of Yes, like, it's always going to cost to build more than it is to acquire, renovate, take those type of existing erected units off the market and create them into public housing, right? Whether that's at the city level, state, federal, right? So what I would like to hear more understanding and perspective, and it could be more of a discussion format, is why do we keep settling for like the terrible rezoning, private market, luxury market rate myths? Like, we have spent $22.2 billion of our taxpayer funds on building through MIH, the Mandatory Inclusionary Housing Program, of 200,000 apartments that most working class New Yorkers cannot afford. Lottery systems are insufficient. The only way to build at deep affordability, it has to, it's a state job to house everyone. We have the vacant units. It costs 4 times more to put people in shelters and to house them. Like, there are real systemic policy issues of how we're prioritizing and spending our money. I mean, Lara kind of alluded to it, right? Like the issues of 421A. We clearly need to just reject this whole tax breaks. Oh, like I think on one of the slides, it said HPD isn't building or acquiring most of the housing, right? It's like mostly market rate housing. That's an issue. We clearly need a moratorium on luxury and market rate rezonings and developments. We need, it is a housing emergency in that sense. There are migrants being pushed out of vacant hotels and being put into like prison-like living conditions. I've been homeless, I've been displaced, I've been through the shelter system, I've seen it. Like, there's really horrendous things going on. So like, is there space and room to actually do what it's gonna take to urgently and like immediately house New Yorkers? Because we can't spend another $22.2 billion of taxpayer subsidies to private billionaire and millionaire developers for housing that's not going to be affordable, right? Like, as I mentioned, the average income in New York City is $43,000, right? I worked in city government, my income was near that. Like, I support a family, and so many people are in that situation. Like, I would like to hear some more on, like, how do we build and acquire, primarily acquire, because we don't actually need to build based on the number of vacant units, according to New York City or New York State government data. The units are out there, they're erected, they're just not being allowed onto the market. And the government should be using eminent domain. That's where our taxpayer funding should be going, not towards police budgets or things that aren't, and shelters, the corrupt shelter industrial complex that launders all this money. Like, that's what needs to happen. And I guess an added layer to that, right, is just all, as Lyric was talking about, all these HPD violations, like, these buildings that aren't safe to live in, like insufficient heat, etc. Like, New Yorkers, especially low-income New Yorkers, are living in deplorable conditions, which include night shift, but are not limited to. Like that, like, there needs to be actual action. Like, as a community board member on the housing committee, like, I take that very seriously. And yeah, I will stop for there to give people some time to bring some things into it.
I think, following your spirit, Doreen, would like for that to be more of a conversation amongst all of us. I would say, within HPD, we do have our limits, right? HPD does not have the ability to force private owners to do anything on their property besides the provision of affordable housing through an MIH provision, right? We don't have the ability to, we can work with private entities who may need some assistance with their building, and in exchange for, some financing from the agency, we get, instead of a 100% market rate building, we get a building that has some affordable units in it based off of those tiers that I shared earlier in the presentation, in exchange for assisting those buildings. The only place where we have the ability to 100% provide all of the units in the project as affordable housing are on city-owned properties, city-owned sites, vacant city-owned sites, where we have that 100% control to ensure that all of the units on that site are built at affordable tiers. And one of the significant problems that I'm sure everyone knows is that the city is running out of those available land and opportunities to create those units on city-owned property.
Right. No, I understood that. I don't dispute that, but that's what I'm saying, that instead of using our tax dollars to give subsidies to those developers to give us crumbs that we cannot afford, like I just explained the MIH data, right? Mm-hmm. Like $22.2 billion of our taxpayer subsidies, 200,000 apartments built that no one can really afford or access. An affordable 2-bedroom is $2,700 when the median rent in New York City is $1,570 something, according to census data. So like that needs to like that's where we should be. The state and the city should be spending its money on taking those private units and putting it in to public things, like acquiring those. Like, we are in a housing emergency. We can pass legislation, we can advocate, we can push for budgetary demands. I think it's something that Donovan Richards, the Queensborough president, all of us, that's where it needs to be. This building through these little programs and little crumbs here and there, and it takes years, and then apparently buildings don't get erected properly and then they get rented out. Like that's not going to work. It's not going to house the 65,000 homeless New Yorkers. There's so many more that are housing insecure, which includes people like myself. Like, I'm just really trying to urge people to.
Right. Doreen, thank you. Thank you for raising these issues. And, this is something that I definitely want to continue talking with you offline. I just want to be mindful of the time. And also I want to just remind folks that the questions you have should be based on the presentation or the housing related questions you may have. Anything policy related, I would ask that if you have a comment, please put it in the chat just to make sure that we can get to everyone's question. And then maybe we can have a more higher level discussion after everyone's questions have been answered. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and ask Flor Martino to unmute to give their question.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That's me. I formed my question before your last comment. It was I understand the tiers and that they are targeting mainly the lowest income people, but as Doreen mentioned, it doesn't really address the problem. I'm with Community Board, Queens Community Board 11, and a member of the community came to our last meeting and mentioned that that a lot of the affordable housing that was built, I guess in the 1950s or 40s, was all on city land. And there's such a Stuyvesant town, and they're still sustainable today, and sort of models of these affordable communities, and asked in terms of Queens that the city is considering a very, very large parcel of city property. I'm sorry, just to backtrack, and used these Stuyvesant town as a model in order for housing to truly be affordable. Instead of using private land and subsidies, that it has to be on using city land or state land really would be the only way for housing to truly be affordable. And then he mentioned that the city is considering a very, very large parcel of land in Queens to donate to some developers who are planning on building a casino. And I was just wondering if HPD, might, also have a project for that land that, might include some affordable housing instead, than developers that can develop a casino on city land. And also amongst committee members, we were talking about all of these buildings that we're reading about in Midtown Manhattan, office buildings that are vacant, largely vacant and struggling. And there's discussion about spending money to rehabilitate them into housing and rezoning. And I was wondering if HPD has some innovations, new projects in the work, some ideas about creating housing in different ways like this.
Thank you for that question, and as well as the commentary. Just to be clear, I have not heard of city-owned property being turned over for the use or the creation of a casino.
Yeah, I want to clarify. There are currently 3 permits that are being issued by, I believe, the Gaming Board of New York State. I don't remember the exact name, sorry. But there is a competition between the 5 boroughs to apply for these permits. So nothing has been guaranteed and no borough has been promised to have a casino built. So I just want to make that clear.
On city land.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I always enjoy being educated about stuff, and that was
he said that they weren't awarded it yet, but that we were actually strongly considered. It was being strongly considered, and I just, what can you say to someone about that the city was thinking of giving them city land to develop a casino on when affordable housing really, they were making an argument that should really be used for people, for housing. And then have you heard about anything in terms of converting existing buildings such as office buildings and things like that, working with policymakers? And are you looking at that? Are you thinking of innovating that way?
Yeah, I can say that, we, especially with the change of administration, we are as an agency looking at really creative ways to create and produce affordable housing. As I said earlier, we're running out of the actual land to do that. And so we, it sort of is forcing us to look at these more creative ways to create affordable housing. So nothing really like concrete to share now, but just the fact that we are opening our eyes a little bit more. New blood, new spirit within the agency, trying to look for new ways to produce affordable housing. That's taking form and taking shape now.
Thank you. Thanks for that. That sounds good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Floor. So next we have Jeremy. Do you want to ask your question?
Yes, hi. Can you guys hear me? Okay. So I have kind of like a mixture of questions and statements because I think that New York City Housing Connect, I don't know if you guys can answer this, but with New York City Housing Connect, and it's a mixture of, which this I know you can't answer because it's Section 8, but pretty much I'm on Section 8 and I'm on City Housing Connect, and currently my family qualifies only for a 2-bedroom. That's what it'll pay. They'll pay for us. When we truly need a 3-bedroom, there's actually 3 people in our household, and obviously, as you can see, I live in the living room. So, that's like, I guess, one of my gripes. But then also another one of my gripes is like, even a 2-bedroom could be expensive. And I was wondering, like, why do you guys take, or like, I guess, why is it calculated from more, like when we talk about, the affordability prices, why is it taking from more, how do you say, wealthier people if they kind of skew the median? If you could answer that.
Yeah, I don't think I could provide like a really good, sufficient, concrete answer. I can say that, my agency is beholden to the provisions of the federal government. Right? We receive federal funds, and that enables us to do the affordable housing production. And one of those guidelines is providing affordable housing to different income tiers based off of what is already set as the AMI 100% AMI tier. So, and again, like I said, that's an argument that I continue to hear, and I don't have an answer for that. If folks allow me to take off my HPD hat, put on my New York City resident hat, right? It's going to my district manager and to my community boards and my colleagues in my local community boards saying, listen, why aren't we petitioning to,
No, Kevin, no, it's the Assembly and the Senate. The community boards have nothing to do with it. That's unfair. Don't dump it on the chairs and the district managers.
Florence, what I'm saying is, why aren't we as a community board going to our representatives and imploring them to, speak on our behalf to make those changes? That's where I was going with that comment.
I talked to you this morning. The problem is that the board members don't understand they're still citizens, even though they're board members. Just because you're a board member doesn't mean that you're not a New York City resident. Every single New York resident who feels that apartments cost too much should be going to their assemblyman, and they should be going to their senator who works for New York State, and say to your New York State senator, and say to your New York State assembly person, listen, you got to help us. We need a change in the AMI, and you are with the state. So therefore, as a private citizen, I believe rent is too expensive. Then you go to your senator, you wag your finger, you say, change the AMI. The community boards are city-based. They are not state-based. But if every single person living in Board 1 went to their Board 1 senator, if every single person living in Board 2 went to their Board 2 senator, if every person living in Board 3 went to their
Florence,
Board 3.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to get to Tanya's question. I appreciate your candor here because I know that you deal with a lot of constituents on a daily basis. So, we can come back to that topic in just a moment. Let me just try to get Tanya's question answered, and then we can kind of do more of an open discussion, or if folks have more questions, just raise your hand. I'll try to get to you as quickly as I can. So Tanya, go ahead.
Hi, Vicki, and thank you so much for recognizing me. I'm going to really go off the radar and bring it back to some philosophical. I'm a member of Community Board 13. If anybody doesn't know, we're at the eastern point of Queens. And I live in Cambria Heights. And in Cambria Heights, we don't have city land. I mean, I can honestly say that we are 98% all single family homes. So for me in Cambria Heights, this idea of affordable housing, it's really not in our conversation. It's more about first-time buyers. That's basically what we would consider affordable housing in Ward 13. But what my concern is, when I look at my other communities within Ward 13, that the city does have land, not that much, but we have people who own land that are constantly coming to us, that are constantly trying to introduce what they call affordable housing, whether we agree with the AMIs and all of this that we go back and forth, how tall, how this, our footprint is so small that you wouldn't even get 500 units in Board 13 to put towards it. But why is HPD or the City of New York constantly and consistently coming before us and saying that we've got to open our doors now and we've got to bear that brunt, when we are supposed to be the future of New York City, the future home buyers? You know, my parents bought our house for $33,000. You have now said the same house is $850,000. So this is a great, you know, there's so much equity in this home that I could go someplace else. I can build, I can get 15 acres of land and still only spend $400,000. Now I could take this house and put it in a program like first-time homebuyer. And where a person, it is taken into consideration what their monthly, you know, income is. So like the AMI for an apartment. Why aren't we looking at that type of model here in Southeast Queens, you know, in Ward 13? Why are we trying to say, we're going to let you build in your backyard? You know, I mean, we're talking about introducing legislation where we can take our backyard and put a 2-bedroom cottage. And then that the density is crazy. These are single family homes. So why are we being asked to change that when you have value right here that is first-time home buyer and being affordable in that nature, where the federal government could attach loans and subsidies? So yeah, I'm going to sell my house for $800,000, but the actual home buyer that comes in here doesn't even look at a mortgage more than $300,000, or doesn't look at a mortgage more than $400,000. So I don't know. I don't know if HPD has ever thought about those type of directions, because our footprint is like under 5%. But that's something that I think would be welcomed in my community. We would welcome first-time home buyers that need that type of assistance, because it stops the foreclosures, because people are giving them mortgages fully knowing they can't afford to pay that mortgage. And all of a sudden, we've got three houses on our block that are constantly being foreclosed in, and they keep dumping somebody who can't afford the mortgage, fails on the mortgage. Here comes the next person, instead of bringing somebody in who's looking for a home to raise their kids, to have a backyard. These individuals may have 4 and 5 kids, have a backyard, be able to walk to school. Why isn't that being supported in the City of New York's bigger plan for housing?
Tanya, thank you for that comment. And you're right. There are multiple ways that we can look at to address the affordable housing crisis. One of the reasons why I was excited to do tonight's presentation was to be introduced to a lot of you. There are certain boards that know me. There's certain boards that have never even seen my face before. And Tanya, I think your board would be one of those boards that has never even heard my name or seen me before. And I wanted to use tonight as a springboard to change that and to really, you know, talk to all of you to get these ideas, right? You're right, there should be more creative ways that we're looking to address affordable housing. And it doesn't necessarily mean through the actual production. And again, I want folks to understand what I'm saying to you tonight is Kevin Paris's words. Okay, I'm not sharing anything from a policy perspective from my agency, and I want to be that transparent with you all. And as we have future conversations, I want to learn from all of you, you know, these intricacies of your communities and where you live, and understand some of these ideas. Like, one of my roles here is being a champion of your voices so that I can take your ideas and try to formulate it with the folks here that actually make the policies that can, turn into different programs that we're able to offer. It's like with you, Tanya, I would like to, further understand more about that. I think you are right. The ability to keep these 1 to 2 family homes affordable for future buyers is another way of addressing the affordability crisis, because the affordability crisis is not just a renter issue. There are folks that want to own homes, and they are also falling within that bucket. So again, I'd like to understand exactly what that vision is that folks have in the community to better equip me to talk to the policymakers here at the agency.
I'll drop my contact information in the chat.
And I think ours is in the chat as well, but also Vicky will be sharing it out as well.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Annabelle, and thank you, Tanya. We'll make sure that everyone has the right contact info too at the end of this, and afterwards I can email any contact info as well. I want to move on to Paul and Cody, because they are 2 folks who haven't been able to ask their question yet. So, and then we'll come back to you, Florence and Doreen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You meant me, correct? Yes, thank you. Yeah, my name is Paul. I'm a Community Board 11 member. Actually, I have to run to a meeting in 12 minutes, so I'm glad you called me now. I just want to echo what I didn't catch her name, the last woman who just spoke from CB 13. I live in CB 11. I live in a single family house. Hearing everybody's housing problems, I don't expect anybody to necessarily feel for me, because I live in a single family house. I'm 57 years old. I'm here for another 20 to 30 years, hopefully. And then when I'm gone, the house will no longer be mine. But I'd like somebody else to live in it, because I worked my whole life for this home with my wife and my family. And, it's the American dream. I want to say as well that I live in a neighborhood that is, if we're going to talk about racial diversity, this neighborhood is now primarily Asian, East Asian. It's white. But I live on the edge of Queens, Nassau County edge of Queens. So in Bayside. So if you go south from here, you have South Indian population majority, also homeowners in a low density neighborhood. You go past that, you have Caribbean American folks in that neighborhood, and then you have African American folks. So it's very actually racially diverse. Has nothing. It more has to do with people who strive to live in a single family home, like she said before, with a yard and trees, and it's a little slice of suburbia. Additionally, as far as zoning goes, New York City is 15% single family. That's classically low. In Portland, Oregon, and Minneapolis, there's been a movement to change, to get rid of a lot of the single family zoning. And that's appropriate, because those cities are large cities with a small, the downtown area is just big, but the actual land of the city is quite large, like New York. But they have much higher percentages of single family housing. And they needed to reduce that, but we don't really need to reduce it here. And additionally, people are working from home much more now. And if you look all around the country, I travel for my job a lot, even up in Westchester, in White Plains, I noticed that, malls and other areas are being made into housing. So the reason I'm mentioning all this is that it's really just to echo her comment, is that, we don't need to get rid of the way of life we live here on the edge of the city, and some parts of Brooklyn and Staten Island and in the Bronx too, where you have a single family house. But the governor and the mayor both want to change that. They want to get rid of single family housing. They want to introduce ADUs and to increase the zoning around transit. It's TOD. I'm not sure what transit is. One of the T is the T in the acronym.
Transit-oriented development.
Thank you very much. Right. Now, I live just 6-minute walk from the Bayside train station. So that would mean that my single family neighborhood, which was built in the 1920s, okay, it's pretty charming.
Paul, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really want to ask you to wrap up so that Kevin can address your question.
Well, that's the whole thing right there. I just want you to, Kevin, I want HPD to consider that part of it too. There's plenty of places. I'd gladly give you a list of them, even where I live, where you can build housing, and you won't have affordable housing and larger housing, and you wouldn't have to disturb these neighborhoods that people desperately of all races and want to hang on to. Thank you.
No problem, Paul. Thank you. I hope you make it to your board meeting on time tonight. And if you can, share my contact information with your board officials. Let them know I'd like to speak with them all. I don't really have a specific response. I think your comment echoes Tanya's. So, it's pretty much the same response there, but I thank you. I look forward to, have an opportunity to speak through, some of your ideas more as well.
Thank you. And I really enjoyed the whole presentation tonight. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, hopefully we can get to 7:30 for you guys then. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Cody to unmute. Cody, whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey. I actually have a question about design standards for affordable housing. I have looked into a lot of the Healthy Materials Lab, which comes out of Parsons at the new school. And they really have, high standards for creating a quality of life for people within affordable housing. And really making sure it's healthy, making sure, you have clean air, you have materials that aren't off-gassing, things like that. I noticed that in the affordable housing plans for Willets Point, which have been being presented to Community Board 7, they really, they're missing the mark. That's an area where you have, there's going to be a lot of construction. There's potentially a casino coming to the parkland across the street. The vestibules of these buildings, the designs that they've already approved that we don't really have say in, they're only about like 10 feet long, I think, which really to have a functional vestibule that keeps out dust, that keeps air clean, you need at least 30 feet. So I guess I'm wondering, when we see these types of issues within the designs of affordable housing, who can we talk to? Where can we go? Because the community board's role, again, is just like advisory. But I do see a lot of challenges with just the architecture of these spaces and that way these buildings are designed are not prioritizing our community's health.
Cody, thank you for that. Again, my role is the mouthpiece for you all in my agency. I would say your first stop would be addressing, a formal letter to myself. We're at a stage where my agency still has a role to play in what happens at Willets Point. So there's an ability for us to discuss the plans that we see, and having feedback like that for my team to share with other folks here in the agency would be helpful.
I definitely did voice that at the Willets Point task force meetings and things like that. But again, it just seems to stop there. So you're saying kind of directly email.
Yeah, if you feel like you're not getting any traction with the folks at the task force meeting, I'm just letting you know there's another outlet right here that you can work with. Amazing.
And have any of you at HPD gone and taken the Healthy Materials for Affordable Housing class at Healthy Materials Lab hosted by Parsons? I think it's really useful information just to have a good baseline of, design standards and techniques that we should really be embracing and, make mandatory if we can.
Right. I'll only speak for myself. I have not. I don't know what our building construction folks and our finance folks have done. I'll just say I know I haven't, and I know about it now. So it's something I'll look into.
Amazing. Thank you, guys.
No, thank you, Cody.
Thank you, Kevin. So we have about 5 minutes left, and Doreen, your hand is raised. So I guess we'll just call this an open discussion. Thank you for your patience, everyone. And hopefully we can do more dialogues like this.
As I said to Paul, I would hope for all of you that are I would hope that all of you would share my contact information with your board leadership and implore them to reach out to me so that I can continue having dialogue with the board, specifically in understanding the nuances of each community located within Queens. I haven't heard any bad comments or bad questions tonight. And you all have given me a lot of things to look up and to really hone in on, in addition to my portfolio of work that I already have. So, again, you have my contact information. There's no limit on emails that you can send to me. But I do beg you all to understand that this is a 3-person team that works on 2 boroughs. So if I do take 2 weeks to get back to your email, I just would like for you all to allow me that opportunity to be a little bit late getting back to you. But my goal is to get back to everybody as best as I can. So again, just thank you all for letting me have some of your time tonight.
Thank you so much. And I have everyone's emails here, so I'll make sure to send a confirmation email after this to make sure you have all the information that we talked about tonight. Kevin, would it be okay if we shared the PDF of your presentation with everyone?
Yeah, let me clean it up a little bit. And then Vicky, I'll send it over to you and then it can be shared out with everybody.
Okay, sorry, there's office work happening also simultaneously. So with that, I'm gonna end the webinar. Thank you, everyone. We finished with a minute over, and we will be in touch with more webinars in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Very